delivery truck pulled away as I signed for the wooden crate on my front porch. Inside, a small golden puppy with the biggest brown eyes I'd ever seen looked up at me. The shipping label read, "Milo, handle with care," but there was no return address. I hadn't ordered a dog, but my lonely apartment felt warmer already. My divorce had been final for 6 months, and the silence in my empty home was driving me crazy. Sarah had taken everything when she left, the furniture, the plants, even the goldfish. Coming home to nothing but bare walls and my own echo had become unbearable. Maybe this puppy was exactly what I needed. Milo was perfect from day one. He never chewed my shoes or had accidents on the carpet. When I left for work each morning, he'd sit by the door with his tail wagging, waiting for me to come home. My neighbors in the apartment building always complimented how well-behaved he was during our evening walks. "You're so lucky," Mrs. Chen from 3B would say. "My cat keeps me awake all night with his yowling. Your little guy is silent as a church mouse." I'd smile and pat Milo's head, proud of my quiet companion. If only I knew what he was really doing while I was gone. The building I lived in was old, built in the 1940s with thin walls and creaky floors. Everyone could hear everyone else's business. Televisions, arguments, music, crying babies. But somehow my apartment stayed mysteriously quiet according to my neighbors. They praised me for training Milo so well, for keeping him calm during the long work days. I worked as an accountant downtown, usually leaving around 7 in the morning and getting back by 6 at night. 11 hours was a long time to leave a puppy alone. But Milo never seemed to mind. He'd greet me at the door like I'd been gone for 5 minutes instead of 500. His enthusiasm made the long work days worth it. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks later. I came home from work to find my upstairs neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, waiting in the hallway. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he spoke. "Your dog," he whispered, glancing at my door. "What kind of training are you doing with him?" I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Milo? He's the easiest dog in the world. He barely makes a sound." Mr. Rodriguez shook his head slowly, backing toward the stairs. "The sounds coming from your place today, those weren't normal dog sounds. They were..." He stopped mid-sentence and hurried away. That night I watched Milo sleep peacefully in his bed beside mine. His little chest rose and fell with each breath. His golden fur looked soft in the moonlight streaming through my window. Whatever Mr. Rodriguez heard must have been from someone else's apartment. There was no way my sweet puppy could make scary sounds. But as I lay there watching him, I noticed something odd. Milo's paws were twitching like he was running in his dreams. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and he made small growling noises. When I reached over to comfort him, his eyes snapped open, completely black for just a second before returning to their normal brown. The next morning brought more strange comments. The mailman mentioned hearing weird growling from my apartment around noon. The lady from the coffee shop downstairs said customers complained about awful noises coming from upstairs. Each person described sounds that didn't match my gentle Milo at all. Mrs. Chen stopped me on my way to work that Thursday. "I don't want to worry you," she said, "but yesterday around lunchtime something in your apartment was making sounds like it was in pain, crying and whimpering, but so loud the whole building could hear it. Is Milo sick?" I assured her that Milo was fine, but doubt started creeping into my mind. Maybe he had separation anxiety that I didn't know about. Maybe being alone for 11 hours every day was making him act out. I decided to come home for lunch that day to check on him. When I opened my apartment door at noon, Milo was curled up on the couch, fast asleep. He looked completely normal, small, golden, peaceful. There were no signs of distress, no torn furniture or scratched walls. He woke up when he heard me and wagged his tail like always. I felt silly for worrying. But that afternoon, 3 more neighbors approached me about the noise. The teenage girl from 2A said it sounded like a wild animal trying to break out of a cage. The elderly man from across the hall claimed he heard howling that made his teeth hurt. Most disturbing was what the young mother from 2C told me. It wasn't just noise, she said, holding her baby closer. It was like something was calling out to other things. My daughter wouldn't stop crying while it was happening. Even my husband came home from work early because I was so scared. Her eyes were red from crying. Please, whatever you're doing to that poor animal, just stop. I decided to test something. Instead of going to work the next day, I'd hide outside my building and watch my window. Maybe someone was breaking into my apartment and scaring Milo. That would explain the strange sounds people kept talking about. I kissed Milo goodbye like always and left for work. From across the street, I had a perfect view of my 3rd-floor window. For the first hour, nothing happened. Milo probably curled up on the couch for his morning nap like he always did. I bought coffee from a cart and settled in to wait, feeling foolish but determined to solve this mystery. Around 9:30, I saw movement behind the glass. A shadow passed by the window, but it seemed too big to be Milo. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The shadow moved past the window once more, and this time I could tell it was walking upright on 2 legs. Then around 10 o'clock, I saw movement behind the glass that made my coffee cup slip from my hands. A dark shape passed by the window, much larger than Milo. Its silhouette filled the entire window frame from top to bottom. Something huge was walking around my apartment on 2 legs. But that was impossible. My hands started sweating as I watched. The shape moved again, and this time I could see it clearly. Something enormous was pacing back and forth in my living room. Its head nearly touched the ceiling, and its arms hung down like a gorilla's. But the worst part was when it pressed its face against the window, staring down at the street below. The thing looking out my window had Milo's brown eyes. Everything else was wrong. The massive size, the gray skin, the long claws, the mouth full of sharp teeth. But those eyes belonged to my dog. I wanted to run up to my apartment right then, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear kept me frozen on the sidewalk. As I watched in horror, the creature's mouth opened wider than any normal animal's could. The sound that came out was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A mix of howling, screaming, and something else that my brain couldn't identify. Every car alarm on the street started blaring. Windows in nearby buildings rattled and some cracked. A flock of pigeons that had been sitting on the power lines fell dead to the pavement around me. Dogs in the neighborhood began howling in response. Someone's car window exploded, sending glass across the sidewalk. The sound lasted for nearly a full minute before stopping as suddenly as it started. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. The creature stepped back from the window and disappeared into my apartment. I waited another hour, shaking and sweating, my mind trying to process what I'd seen. Then I saw Milo's small golden form appear at the window, looking perfectly normal again. He was wagging his tail and looking down at the street like he was waiting for me to come home. Just a regular puppy being cute and innocent. But I knew better now. I'd seen what he became when I wasn't there to witness it. The question was, what exactly was Milo? I couldn't go back to my apartment that day. Instead, I walked around the city for hours, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Maybe I was having a mental breakdown from the stress of the divorce. Maybe living alone was making me hallucinate. but the dead birds on the sidewalk were real. The broken windows were real. I spent the day at the library trying to research what I'd seen. But how do you look up information about dogs that turn into monsters? I felt crazy even thinking about it. Every website I found talked about normal dog behavior, separation anxiety, destructive tendencies, excessive barking. Nothing about supernatural transformations. When I finally came home that evening, Milo greeted me like always. He jumped up and licked my face, his tail going crazy with excitement. I knelt down to pet him, looking deep into those familiar brown eyes. They seemed normal now, full of love and happiness to see me. But I'd seen what hid behind them. "Were you a good boy today?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Milo barked once and brought me his favorite toy, a little stuffed duck that squeaked when he bit it. He looked so innocent, so happy to see me. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that what I'd seen was just my imagination playing tricks. That night, I barely slept. Every time Milo shifted in his bed, I opened my eyes to check on him. He looked peaceful and innocent, breathing softly with his paws tucked under his chin. But I knew better now. When morning came, I pretended to leave for work again, but this time I hid in the building's basement. The basement was dark and smelled like mold, but I could hear everything that happened in the building through the old heating system. I settled in behind the furnace with a flashlight and waited. If Milo was making terrible noises, I'd hear them from down here. Then I'd know for sure that I wasn't losing my mind. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard it. A deep growling sound that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. The building's pipes rattled and groaned like they were under enormous pressure. Upstairs, something heavy was walking around my apartment with footsteps that made the ceiling shake above me. The growling got louder and deeper, joined by other sounds that made my skin crawl. Scratching noises like giant claws dragging across wood, thumping sounds like furniture being thrown around, and underneath it all, a low rumbling that I felt in my bones more than heard with my ears. Other tenants started coming out of their apartments, looking scared and confused. I could hear their voices through the vents, people asking each other what was making all that noise, whether they should call the police, if the building was structurally sound. Some were packing up and leaving right then and there. Mrs. Chen grabbed my arm as I pretended to come up from checking the mailboxes. "It's getting worse," she said, pointing toward my floor. "Whatever's in your apartment is getting bigger, louder. My cats won't stop hiding under the bed." I nodded and acted surprised, but inside I was terrified. "Maybe you should call animal control," she suggested. "Your dog might be sick or injured. That's not normal behavior." I promised I would look into it, but I knew animal control wouldn't be able to help with what Milo had become. This was beyond their expertise. The third day of watching brought new horrors. The creature in my apartment had grown even larger. When it pressed its face to the window this time, the glass cracked under the pressure. Its claws left deep scratches in the window frame that I could see from across the street. The metal frame actually bent under its grip. When it made its terrible sound this time, car windows didn't just crack, they exploded outward in showers of glass. Every dog within 6 blocks started howling at once. Car alarms weren't just triggered, they were destroyed. The electronics fried by whatever frequency the creature was producing. A tree in the courtyard lost all its leaves in seconds. I watched a woman walking her baby down the sidewalk suddenly collapse, blood coming from her ears. She was too far away to have been hurt by any normal sound. Other people on the street staggered and fell to their knees, holding their heads. Whatever Milo was doing, it was affecting people blocks away. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my apartment anymore. Milo's transformations were getting stronger, affecting a wider area each time. If this continued, innocent people would get hurt. I had to find a way to stop it. But first I needed to understand what was really happening. I realized I had to confront Milo that night. Maybe if I talked to him about what I'd seen, he'd stop changing. Maybe he didn't know what was happening to him. Maybe there was still some part of the sweet puppy I'd fallen in love with inside that monster. When I got home, he acted completely normal, running in circles, bringing me his favorite toy, eating his dinner like a regular dog. "Milo," I said softly, sitting on the floor beside him while he ate. "I know what you do when I'm gone." His ears perked up, and he tilted his head like he was trying to understand. "You can't keep doing it. You're scaring people. You're hurting people. You're scaring me." He stopped eating and looked at me with those big brown eyes. For a moment, he seemed genuinely confused, like he didn't know what I was talking about. He licked my hand and wagged his tail, but something changed in his expression. His eyes got darker, like storm clouds moving in. "You're not supposed to know about that," he said. The words came out in his normal puppy bark, but somehow I understood them clearly. My brain tried to reject what I was hearing, but there was no mistaking it. Milo had spoken to me, not with human words, but with thoughts that appeared directly in my mind. "I've been so careful," he continued, his tail still wagging but his eyes growing darker. "I only change when you're gone. I only let out my real voice when you can't hear it. I've been such a good boy for you." The innocent puppy voice in my head was somehow more terrifying than any monster growl would have been. That night I woke up to find Milo standing beside my bed. But he wasn't small anymore. In the darkness I could see his huge shape towering over me, his head nearly touching the ceiling. His eyes glowed like red coals, and his teeth gleamed in the moonlight streaming through the window. When he saw me looking, he smiled, an awful smile that no dog should be able to make. His lips pulled back to reveal rows of sharp teeth, but the expression was almost playful, like he was happy I was finally seeing the real him. His tail was even wagging, creating a horrible thumping sound against the wall. "You weren't supposed to know," he said in a voice like grinding stone, but I could still hear the puppy underneath it. The contrast made it so much worse. I was happy just changing during the day. I got to be myself for a few hours, then come back and be your good boy. But now you've ruined everything. His claws reached toward my face, each one as long as my finger and sharp as razors. But he didn't hurt me, just traced them gently along my cheek like he was petting me. "I really do love you," he said, his voice becoming softer, more like the Milo I knew. "You saved me from being lonely, but now I don't know what to do." I managed to find my voice. "What are you?" I whispered. Milo's expression became sad, almost hurt. "I'm your dog," he said simply. "I'm your best friend. I'm the one who waits for you to come home every day and loves you no matter what. But I'm also something else. Something that needs to stretch and grow and make noise sometimes." He sat back on his haunches like he always did when he wanted treats, but now he was 7 feet tall and covered in dark scales. "I tried so hard to be good," he continued. "I only changed when you were at work. I never hurt anyone in the building, well, not badly. I just needed to be loud sometimes, to feel big and strong and scary." I realized he was still trying to be my pet, even in this monstrous form. He was sitting, waiting for me to tell him he was a good boy. The need for approval and affection was still there, twisted up with whatever supernatural hunger drove his transformations. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. I managed to roll off the bed and run toward the door. Behind me, Milo's laugh echoed through the apartment. Not a dog's bark, but something much worse mixed with genuine hurt. that I was running away from him. His heavy footsteps shook the floor as he followed me, but he wasn't trying to catch me. He was just walking, like we were playing a game. "Don't leave me," he called after me, his voice cracking like a child's. "I promise I'll be good. I'll try harder to stay small during the day. We can work something out." But even as he spoke, I could hear the hunger underneath his words, the barely contained need to be his true self. The hallway was dark and empty. I ran toward the stairs, but Milo was faster when he wanted to be. His claws scraped the walls as he moved, leaving deep gouges in the paint. But he was being careful not to hurt the building too badly. He still wanted us to have a home to come back to. "You can't leave me," he said, his voice getting deeper and more desperate. "I need you to come home each day. That's when I get to change back. Without you, I'll be stuck like this forever." His words stopped me at the top of the stairs. If he was telling the truth, then leaving would make things worse, not better. I made it to the first floor before he caught up with me. His massive hand wrapped around my ankle, but gently, like he was afraid of breaking me. "Please," he said, pulling me back toward the stairs. His claws were careful not to pierce my skin. "Don't you understand? I'm not really a dog. I never was. But I need someone to believe I'm innocent." The contradiction in his words hit me. He needed me to see him as a harmless pet, but he also needed to be his true monstrous self. That's why he only changed when I was gone. He could satisfy both needs without me knowing. But now that I'd discovered his secret, the balance was broken. Mrs. Chen's door opened a crack and I saw her eye peeking out. "Help me!" I screamed, reaching toward her. But when she saw Milo's true form crouched in the hallway, she slammed the door shut and I heard multiple locks clicking into place. Her terrified sobbing came through the thin wood. No one was going to help me. No one wanted to see what my sweet puppy really was. They'd rather hide and pretend it wasn't happening than get involved. I was completely alone with whatever Milo had become, just like I'd been alone before he arrived. The irony wasn't lost on me. Milo dragged me back to my apartment, but he was gentle about it. He lifted me up and carried me like a child, being careful not to let his claws dig in. "I'm sorry you had to see me like this," he said sadly. "I know it's scary, but this is who I really am. I can't change that." He set me down on the couch and transformed back into his puppy form right in front of me. The change was smooth and quick, his massive body shrinking down, his claws retracting, his scales fading back to golden fur. In seconds, he looked like a normal dog again, but his eyes stayed black. "Is this better?" he asked, jumping up onto the couch beside me. "I can stay small if you want. I can pretend to be just a regular dog, but I'll need to change back sometimes or I'll go crazy. And now that you know the truth, you'll have to help me hide it." In the lamplight, I could see him clearly for the first time. Even in his small form, there were subtle differences I'd never noticed before. His teeth were slightly too sharp. His nails were harder and darker than normal dog claws. His tongue was rougher, almost like a cat's, but worse. How had I missed these details? "You're not really a dog at all, are you?" I asked. Milo's tail stopped wagging and he looked down at his paws. "I'm whatever you need me to be," he said quietly. "When you're sad and lonely, I'm a loving pet. When you're happy, I'm playful and fun. But when you're not here, I get to be myself." He looked up at me with those black eyes that somehow still managed to look innocent. "Here's how this works," he said, his voice taking on a more businesslike tone. "Every morning you leave for work. I get to be my real self for 8 hours. When you come home, I pretend to be your pet again. It's a fair trade. The casualness of his proposal was almost worse than his earlier threats. He was talking about terrorizing my neighbors and potentially hurting innocent people like it was a reasonable compromise. "What happens if I don't agree?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Milo's expression became sad, but there was something else underneath it, something hungry and patient. "Then I stop pretending to be small when you're home. I stop pretending to be friendly, and you become my food instead of my owner." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was explaining the rules of a board game. "But I don't want to eat you," he continued quickly. "You're my favorite person. You pet me and talk to me and make me feel loved. I'd much rather keep you as my friend than turn you into dinner. So please, let's just go back to the way things were. You can pretend you never saw anything." The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. My legs felt like rubber and my hands wouldn't stop shaking, but I had no choice. Milo had made it clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. At the office, I stared at my computer screen and tried to think of a way out. Every plan I came up with ended the same way, with Milo's claws and teeth. I could call the police, but what would I tell them? That my dog turns into a monster during the day? They'd think I was crazy. I could try to have him put down, but something told me normal veterinary methods wouldn't work on whatever Milo really was. I could move away, but he'd already proven he could track me down. Besides, if I left him behind, he'd be stuck in his monster form permanently. That would be even worse for everyone in the building. At least this way, he spent half his time as a harmless puppy. When I came home that evening, Milo was waiting by the door with his tail wagging. He looked exactly like the sweet puppy I'd first met. Golden fur, brown eyes that had returned to normal, innocent expression. But now I knew it was all an act. The real Milo was the monster that spent his days growing stronger. "How was work?" he asked cheerfully, jumping up to lick my face. The casual normalcy of the question, combined with everything I now knew, made my stomach turn. But I played along, petting him and telling him about my day like we always did. What choice did I have? This went on for 2 weeks. Every day I'd leave for work, knowing that something evil was loose in my apartment. The sounds got worse, louder, more violent, more disturbing. My neighbors started avoiding me in the hallways. Several more families moved out without explanation. The building felt emptier and scarier each day. But every night, I'd come home to my innocent pet, and we'd pretend everything was normal. Milo would bring me his toys, eat his dinner, curl up next to me while I watched television. If I didn't know better, I'd think he was the perfect companion. The cognitive dissonance was driving me slowly insane. Then I started noticing changes even when I was home. Little things at first. His eyes would glow red for just a second when he looked at me. His nails seemed sharper when he jumped on my lap. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with an expression that was too intelligent, too calculating for any normal animal. One evening I was cooking dinner when I dropped a knife on the floor. When I bent down to pick it up, I found Milo staring at it with intense interest. His pupils were dilated and he was drooling more than usual. When he noticed me watching, he quickly looked away and went back to his normal puppy behavior. Another night, I woke up to use the bathroom and found Milo sitting in the living room, completely motionless. He wasn't sleeping. He was just sitting there in the dark with his back to me, perfectly still. When I called his name, he didn't respond. I stood there for several minutes, but he never moved. In the morning, he was back in his bed like nothing had happened. The final straw came when I returned home early from work one day. I'd been feeling sick, and my boss let me leave at noon. When I opened my apartment door, I expected to find Milo in his monster form, Instead, I found him in his puppy form, but he was doing something that made my skin crawl. He was methodically destroying my furniture, but not like an angry or bored dog would. He was taking it apart piece by piece with surgical precision, using his claws to separate every joint and seam. The couch had been completely disassembled without damaging the fabric. The coffee table was reduced to its component parts, arranged in neat piles. When he saw me, he stopped and wagged his tail like always. "You're home early," he said happily. "I was just redecorating. Do you like it?" The apartment looked like someone had taken it apart and was planning to rebuild it into something else entirely, something that wouldn't quite be furniture anymore. "Why?" I asked, looking around at the organized destruction. Milo tilted his head like he didn't understand the question. "I'm getting stronger," he explained. "I don't need to wait for you to leave anymore. I can do both things at the same time now." One night, I woke up to find him standing over me again. But this time, he was still in his small puppy form. Only his eyes had changed. They were completely black now, like looking into deep holes. "I don't need to wait for you to leave anymore," he said in his cute puppy voice. Hearing those terrible words come from his sweet face was worse than seeing his monster form. At least when he looked like a demon, his actions made sense. But this innocent puppy saying horrible things broke something in my brain. "I'm strong enough now to be both," he continued, jumping onto my chest. His small paws felt heavier than they should have, like he was made of lead instead of flesh and bone. "During the day, I'll be the demon. At night, I'll be your pet. You get to see both sides of me now." His little pink tongue licked my cheek, but it felt like sandpaper covered in acid. I realized he'd been feeding off something all these weeks. Not just food, but my fear, my loneliness, my need for companionship. Every day I came home happy to see him made him stronger. Every night I petted him and told him he was a good boy, gave him more power. I'd been helping him grow into something unstoppable. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Milo's puppy face smiled, an expression that should have been cute, but was now horrifying. "I want you to love me," he said simply. "I want you to need me. I want you to be so afraid of being alone that you'll accept anything I do, as long as I keep you company." The truth hit me like a physical blow. Milo hadn't been delivered to my door by accident. He'd been sent, or had sent himself, specifically because he could sense my desperation. He'd known exactly what I needed to hear, how to act, what face to wear. Everything about our relationship had been calculated. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate on anything. My coworkers kept asking if I was feeling sick because I looked so pale and tired. I wanted to tell them the truth, that my dog was actually a demon that was slowly taking over my life. But who would believe such a crazy story? My supervisor called me into her office around lunchtime. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked with genuine concern. "You've seemed distracted lately. Your work is usually so precise, but you've made several errors this week." I wanted to break down and tell her everything, but I just nodded and promised to do better. When I got home that evening, I found my apartment completely transformed. The walls had been painted black, but not with regular paint, with something that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. My furniture had been rearranged into patterns that hurt to look at directly. Strange symbols were carved into the wooden floor. In the middle of the chaos sat Milo, looking perfectly normal except for his black eyes. "I was redecorating while you were gone," he said happily. "I thought it was time our home reflected both of our personalities. Do you like what I've done with the place?" The apartment felt wrong now, like the geometry was slightly off. Doorways seemed narrower than they should be. The ceiling appeared lower. Even the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. I had to make some modifications, Milo explained. The old space was designed for humans. This new version works better for both of us. I was practicing my new abilities, he said cheerfully. Want to see what I can do now? Before I could answer, he began to change. But instead of growing into his monster form, he started to split apart. One Milo stayed small and cute on the floor. Another Milo grew large and terrifying beside him. Now there were two of him, the fake pet and the real demon, existing at the same time. Isn't this great? Both versions said at once, their voices mixing together in a horrible harmony. Now I never have to hide again. I can be your loving pet and your worst nightmare whenever I want. The small Milo jumped up for pets while the large one showed me his claws. Both were equally real, equally solid. I could smell the puppy scent from one and something like sulfur from the other. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. How could one creature be in two places at once? It took me weeks to figure out how to do this, they continued, speaking in perfect unison. But you helped me practice. Every time you came home and pretended everything was normal, you made me stronger. Every time you pet me while knowing what I really was, you fed my power. I staggered backward, trying to reach the door, but my legs wouldn't work properly. The room seemed to be tilting and spinning. Don't try to leave, both Milo said gently. You're not well. All this stress has been bad for you. Let us take care of you now. The small Milo nuzzled against my leg, while the large one reached out with surprising gentleness and steadied me. Their touch felt real and warm and comforting, which somehow made it worse. Even knowing what they were, part of me still wanted to be pet and loved by them. I knew then that I had to leave. It didn't matter where I went or how far I ran. I couldn't live like this anymore. The apartment wasn't my home anymore. It was becoming something else, shaped by Milo's needs instead of mine. And I was changing too, becoming something that could accept this nightmare as normal. That night, while both Milos slept, the small one in his bed, the large one curled up in the corner like a giant dog, I packed a small bag with essentials. I left everything else behind except my wallet and car keys. Moving as quietly as possible, I snuck out of my apartment and down to the parking garage. My car started on the first try, which felt like a miracle. I drove out of the city without looking back, heading for the interstate. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. Whatever Milo was, whatever hold he had on me, distance would break it. I just had to get far enough away. I drove until I ran out of gas somewhere in the middle of nowhere, then got a room at a truck stop motel. The bed was lumpy and the room smelled like cigarettes, but it was the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks. No glowing eyes watching me, no claws scratching at my door, no voice telling me what a good boy he was while planning terrible things. But my peace didn't last long. The next morning, I found tiny paw prints in the dust outside my hotel room. They led from the parking lot right to my door, as if something small had walked across the lot and stopped at my room. Inside the bathroom, someone had written, "Come home," on the mirror, but not with a finger. The letters looked like they'd been scratched in with claws. I checked out immediately and drove to another town, then another. Each time, Milo found me within hours. Sometimes I'd see a small golden dog watching me from across the street, too far away to be sure it was him, but I knew. Sometimes I'd hear that terrible growling sound coming from the walls of whatever building I was hiding in. The worst was when I'd check into a new motel and find that the previous guest had left behind a small stuffed duck, the same toy Milo used to bring me at home. It would be sitting on the bed like a calling card, letting me know he'd been there first. No matter how random my route, he was always one step ahead. After a week of running, I was exhausted and nearly out of money. I'd barely slept or eaten, constantly looking over my shoulder for signs that he'd found me again. In a small diner outside Denver, I finally admitted defeat. Maybe I could reason with him. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. I called my apartment building's manager from the diner's payphone. "Oh, you need to come back right away," she said, sounding worried and angry. "Your dog has been howling nonstop since you left. The other tenants are threatening to break their leases. Animal control came by twice, but they couldn't get into your apartment without you there." "What kind of howling?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Like he's in terrible pain," she said, "but also angry. Really, really angry. And it's getting louder every day. Yesterday, windows started breaking in the apartments below yours. We've had to evacuate the second floor." I realized Milo wasn't just following me. He was in two places at once. Part of him was still in my apartment, probably in his monster form, terrorizing my neighbors and growing more powerful. The other part was hunting me across the country. He'd gotten so strong that he could split himself up and be everywhere he wanted to be. "There's something else," the manager continued nervously. "Other tenants have reported seeing things in the hallways at night. Small things that look like your dog, but wrong somehow. And they all seem to be looking for you. How many dogs do you have?" My blood went cold. It wasn't just two Milos anymore. He was creating more copies of himself, spreading throughout the building like an infection. Each copy was probably just as intelligent and dangerous as the original. My neighbors weren't just dealing with noise anymore. They were living in a building full of demons that looked like cute puppies. That night, in a motel outside Colorado Springs, I made my decision. I couldn't keep running forever. Milo would never stop following me, and he'd keep hurting innocent people until I came back. Maybe if I returned home and faced him directly, I could find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. The drive back took 2 days. With each mile closer to home, I felt heavier, like something was pressing down on my chest. I knew Milo, all the Milos, could sense me coming. They were probably getting excited, planning what they'd do to me when I walked through that door. I stopped at a gas station just outside the city to call the building manager again. "Thank God you're almost home," she said, sounding like she was on the verge of a breakdown. "It's gotten so much worse. We've had to call the police 6 times in the last 2 days. They can't find anything wrong, but half the building is empty now." "What's been happening?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The sounds aren't just coming from your apartment anymore," she whispered. "They're coming from everywhere. The walls, the basement, even the roof. It's like the whole building is alive somehow. And those things that look like your dog, there are dozens of them now." My apartment building looked different when I pulled up. Half the windows were boarded up, and there was a "for rent" sign out front, with most of the units listed as available. Several fire trucks and police cars were parked outside, their lights flashing. Yellow tape blocked off the main entrance. I parked across the street and watched the chaos. Paramedics were wheeling someone out on a stretcher, an elderly man I recognized from the first floor. He was unconscious but breathing. A police officer was interviewing a young woman who kept pointing at the building and shaking her head. Whatever was happening inside, it was getting worse. A firefighter approached my car as I sat there watching. "You can't park here, sir," he said. This building has been evacuated due to a gas leak. I nodded and drove around the block, but I knew there was no gas leak. The authorities were probably as confused as everyone else about what was really happening. I waited until dark, then snuck around to the back of the building. The rear entrance was unlocked, probably because everyone had left in such a hurry. The basement was my best bet for getting to my apartment without being seen by any authorities who might still be around. The basement was darker than I remembered, and it smelled different, not like mold anymore, but like something organic and rotten. As I felt my way toward the stairs, I heard soft sounds coming from the shadows, scurrying noises, like small animals moving around just out of sight. My flashlight beam caught dozens of pairs of glowing eyes staring at me from the darkness. Small golden shapes moved between the pipes and storage boxes. Milos, all of them, watching me with those black eyes. Some were puppy-sized, others were slightly larger, and a few were so small they looked like golden mice. "Welcome home," they all said at once, their voices creating an echo that seemed to come from inside my own head. "We've been waiting for you. We've been so lonely without you." None of them moved toward me, but I could feel their hunger radiating through the darkness like heat from a fire. I made my way to the stairs, the army of Milos following at a respectful distance. They didn't try to stop me or hurt me. They just wanted to escort me home, like well-trained pets walking their owner. The thought would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. The stairwell was worse than the basement. Claw marks covered every surface, the walls, the steps, even the ceiling. Some were small, like they'd been made by puppy claws. Others were huge, gouged deep into the concrete. The handrail had been completely destroyed, twisted into unrecognizable metal sculptures. When I reached the third floor, I found the hallway completely transformed. The walls were covered in the same light-absorbing black substance I'd seen in my apartment. Strange symbols were carved everywhere, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ceiling had been raised somehow, making the space feel like a cathedral instead of an apartment building. My apartment door was slightly open, which was impossible since I'd locked it when I left. Soft golden light spilled out into the hallway, and I could hear gentle music playing inside. The same classical station I always listened to while cooking dinner. It sounded almost normal, which made it more frightening than any monster noise would have been. I pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. The apartment had been completely transformed into something that wasn't quite human architecture anymore. The rooms flowed into each other in ways that defied the building's original layout. Furniture hung from the ceiling at impossible angles. Windows showed views of places that couldn't exist. And everywhere, covering every surface, were Milos. Hundreds of them in every size imaginable. Some looked exactly like the puppy I'd first met. Others were clearly the monster form I'd witnessed. Most were something in between. Familiar golden fur covering bodies that were slightly wrong in ways I couldn't identify. They were all doing normal dog things, sleeping, playing with toys, chewing on bones. But the toys were made of materials I couldn't identify, and the bones were too large to have come from any earthly animal. The scene would have been cute if it wasn't so fundamentally wrong. In the center of the living room, on what used to be my couch, sat the original Milo. He looked exactly like the puppy I'd brought home, except for his eyes, which were now completely black. He was wagging his tail and holding his favorite stuffed duck in his mouth. "You came back," he said, dropping the toy at my feet. "I knew you would. You love me too much to stay away forever." All the other Milos stopped what they were doing and looked at me with expectant faces. Hundreds of pairs of black eyes focused on me with the same adoring expression. Welcome to our new home, the original Milo continued, gesturing around the transformed space with one paw. I've been busy while you were gone, making improvements, adding family members. We're not just you and me anymore, we're a pack. His voice was filled with genuine happiness and pride. Which one do you want to pet first? All the Milos asked together, their voices creating a harmony that resonated in my bones. Some of them wagged their tails hopefully. Others rolled over to show their bellies. A few brought me toys or bones as offerings. They all wanted my attention and approval. I knelt down and let the original Milo jump into my arms. He felt real, warm fur, soft ears, wet nose. His tail wagged so hard his whole body wiggled with excitement. But when I looked into his black eyes, I saw nothing but an endless hunger that would never be satisfied. "Good boy," I said softly, just like I used to. He licked my face and his tail wagged harder. Around us, all the other Milos made happy noises, barking, whimpering with joy, tails thumping against various surfaces. They were all so pleased that I was home and showing affection to their original. "That's better," he said, nuzzling against my neck. "Now we can be a family again, all of us, together forever." The other Milos started moving closer, wanting their share of attention. I was surrounded by hundreds of creatures that looked like my beloved pet, but were actually something much worse. "I have so many new tricks to show you," the original continued excitedly. "I learned them while you were gone. Watch this." He barked once and all the other Milos began to change shape. Some became larger, others smaller, some grew extra limbs or eyes. Others turned into shapes that weren't quite animal or human, but something in between. "Do you like the new us?" they all asked at once, their voices now coming from mouths that were the wrong shapes to make human words. "We're getting better at being ourselves. Soon we won't need to pretend at all." The room filled with more versions of Milo than I could count, each one slightly different, but all sharing those same black eyes. But even as they transformed into increasingly horrible shapes, they still acted like dogs, wagging tails, bringing me toys, trying to lick my face with tongues that were too long or had too many parts. The contrast between their appearance and behavior was nauseating. I understood then that there was no escape, no solution, no way to fix what had happened. Milo, or whatever he really was, had grown too powerful, too numerous. He'd consumed all my fear and loneliness and love and turned it into an army. Every day, I'd cared for him as a pet had fed the monster inside. Every night, I'd felt grateful for his company had made him stronger. The building around us groaned and shifted, the walls flowing like liquid to accommodate more Milos as they continued multiplying. Through the windows, I could see the city beyond, full of lonely people who might make perfect targets for creatures like these. Milo had learned everything he needed to know about human nature from me. "Are you hungry?" Several Milos asked, bringing me bowls of food that definitely hadn't come from my kitchen. "Are you tired? We made you a new bed." Others gestured toward what had once been my bedroom but was now something like a nest made of soft materials I couldn't identify. Now I live with hundreds of Milos in my transformed apartment that's no longer quite part of the real world. They never sleep and they never let me leave, but they take excellent care of me. Some bring me food from places I don't want to think about. Others entertain me with games that would be fun if they weren't so wrong. All of them want attention and affection constantly. The building manager stopped checking on me after the first week back. The police stopped responding to calls because officially, no one lives here anymore. The power and water still work, probably because Milo needs them to keep me alive and comfortable. I'm his pet now, just like he used to be mine. They're very good owners, actually. They make sure I eat and sleep and get enough exercise walking around our impossible apartment. They bring me presents, toys, and treasures from the outside world that I try not to examine too closely. They even let me watch television, though the shows are all slightly different from the ones I remember. Sometimes I wonder if the original puppy I fell in love with was ever real, or if it was always just Milo pretending. Maybe he was never delivered to my door by accident. Maybe he chose me specifically because he could sense how lonely I was, how desperate for companionship. Maybe there are others like him, being delivered to other lonely people right now. The Milos tell me stories sometimes about their adventures in the outside world, how they find people who need love and comfort, how they become exactly what those people want them to be, how they grow stronger and more numerous with each new owner who feeds them affection while trying to ignore the warning signs. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that when you get a pet, any pet, you should be very careful about what you're really bringing into your home, because sometimes the thing that loves you most is the thing that will destroy you. And sometimes the best boy in the world is actually the worst thing you could ever imagine. The Milos are calling me now. They want their dinner and their evening walk around our apartment that's bigger inside than it should be. They want me to pet them and tell them stories and pretend everything is normal, so I'll do what they want, just like I always do, because I'm not their owner anymore. I'm their favorite toy, and toys don't get to leave. But at least I'm never lonely now. I have hundreds of loving pets who think I'm the most important person in the world. They'll never abandon me or divorce me or find someone better. They'll keep me forever, safe and loved and completely trapped. Sometimes, late at night when most of the Milos are sleeping, I think about the other tenants who used to live in this building, the ones who moved away when the sounds got too bad. I hope they found new homes. I hope they're safe. I hope they never get mysterious deliveries containing exactly what they think they need. Because Milo was right about one thing. We all need someone to love us, someone to come home to, someone to make the loneliness go away. But sometimes when we're desperate enough, we'll accept that love from anyone or anything that offers it, even if we should know better, even if all the warning signs are there. And once you accept that kind of love, once you let it into your home and your heart, it's very hard to give up. Even when you discover what it really costs, even when you realize you're not the owner anymore, you're just another pet in someone else's collection. The Milos are getting impatient now. They want their attention and their praise and their reassurance that they're good boys. All hundreds of them, waiting for me to love them despite what they are. Or maybe because of what they are. So I'll pet them and play with them and tell them they're the best dogs in the world, because that's what good owners do. And deep down, despite everything, I still love them. That's the most terrifying part of all. Even knowing the truth, even seeing what they really are, part of me is still grateful not to be alone. Maybe that makes me the real monster in this story. The person so desperate for love that I'll accept it from demons as long as they look like golden puppies when they give it to me. But at least I'm not lonely anymore. At least I have someones who will never leave me. Even if leaving was never really an option anyway. Good boys, all of them. The very best boys in the world.